Hello, I'm Daniela. In honor of National Donut Day here on YouTube, I created a slow stitching video to make fabric donuts to use in your slow stitching projects, specifically your slow stitching pages for your fabric books. These donuts are kind of interesting because they're round and also the ones with the donut holes. And you can even stuff them with pillow stuffing just to give them a little dimension, a little texture, and that makes them look really realistic. Now I've created 4 different kinds based on actual donuts with a little bit of whimsy. So there's a little bit of something fun from the fabric, the colors, and the threads that we use. And here's my process. To get started on creating this cute little grouping of donuts, I have my backing fabric with batting on it. Now this is just fabric with some batting. You can use a quilt, you can use just a piece of fabric, you can use felt, whatever you'd like. This is what I choose. And I just like a neutral color. You can embellish this as much as you want with fabric collage and stitches beforehand, but I'm going to keep it pretty simple for now. And then I have the fun part. I have the colors here of different fabrics that I want to use for my donuts. And I'll start with the actual donut itself. And if we think of this like the little cake that it is, this is going to be my donut. And this is going to be the shadow to the donut. Now the shadow to the donut offers contrast to the backing, because for my backing the neutrals are so close together. I needed something to make it really stand out. But if you notice on donuts, there seems to be just a raised edge and a darkness. I don't have a lot of browns in my fabric, so I just chose some fabrics that were darker than this. So this one has some teal in it, which is kind of whimsical, and this one is just the gray. Either of these will work really nicely, and I think I'll use both. I have some little fluff here, this stuff you stuff pillows with, actually, and I just have a little wooden stick here to help stuff my little donuts. The stuffing is completely optional. If you don't have stuffing, you can use additional fabric. You can skip it altogether, or you can use batting that you cut up if you have some batting scraps. And then last I have my donut toppers, and this is the part that I find adorable. I have this cute little fabric, these little faces, and so I'm going to cut this out to make it look like the top of a donut that's been glazed with just some cute little decorations. So I'll just choose one of these faces to use. It's kind of rounded, and that will fit on my donut nicely. I can also stitch in some sprinkles, or I can use beads to add dimension. And then I just chose some fabrics and some colors that reminded me of donuts, like the pink frosting. And then just this pretty little floral piece has nice colors in it that I could cut out and it will look like a decorated donut. And I think that will offset this little face quite nicely. Then lastly, I love Boston cream donuts with their chocolate glaze. So I have a piece of dark fabric that I'll use as my chocolate glaze for the donut. So to get started, I decide if I want to make a round donut or the donut with a little donut hole. You can do both, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'll set these aside for now, come back to them in a moment. I like to start out with making the actual donut here with this beige fabric, and I like to fold it over so that I can cut 2 circles at a time. For my piece, I'm going to have 4 donuts. So I choose a size just for my template for the donut that I'm going to make, and I'm going to use this size. So I'm just going to choose this size. It's 2 1/4 inches, but use whatever size you like that fits your needs in your sewing page, however you want to do it. And so I'll just make 2 layers here. Each of these circles has 2 layers of fabric, so I'll have my 4 donuts when I'm done. I'm just going to sketch a little donut hole in the center. So it looks like the donut that looks more like a ring than a solid donut. I just like that variety. The next stage is just to cut these out. And because I'm cutting through 2 layers, it saves me a little bit of time as well. If any marker remains on this piece, I can just iron it when I'm done, and the heat from the iron will take away any marker that remains. If I was concerned, I could have just folded the fabric and written on the wrong side of the fabric. So to cut out the donut with the donut hole, I just like to cut the perimeter first. My circles here that I'm cutting aren't perfect, and that's okay. That's part of the beauty of slow stitching. It has that imperfections. And then I just take my fabric and fold it in half, and I use the guide that I created for that fabric circle And there I have my piece with my donut hole. And when I separate them, I have my 4 donuts. Just like that. So I can see here that these pieces really need a good pressing. So I'll just press them, and that will also get rid of the marker at this time. There, that's much better. So now I have my donuts, the donut cake itself, and now I want the bottom part. So again, I'm going to come here and I'll cut 2 circles, and I'll use this fabric here, and I'll actually fold it the wrong side. Now I know I use the 2 1/4 inch circle, so I'm going to use just the larger one, just so I get a little more of a barrier here for the backing. So I'll just trace that down and cut that out, and I'll cut 2 from this fabric and 2 from the black fabric. So now I have my backgrounds and my donuts. I'll just pair them up just because it makes it easier. And so I have 1 donut for each. And now I can start embellishing. So I know for this one, I'll probably make that one into my Boston cream. So I can just take my little black fabric, and then I just want to cut that into a rounded spot so it kind of looks like the glaze on the top of the donut, like it's just been dipped. So I just make slightly rounded edges. So that's one option. For this one, I can take the cute little face here and do the same thing, just to make it look like it's a frosted donut with a little decoration. So I'll just cut around the edge, and again I do that little rounded edge so that it looks like the glaze is falling around the donut. There's that. And I can do the same thing with this piece here, because I do like the way that looks, that little floral design. And so I have a few options here, and I can decide which one I want to use when it's time. Now for my donut with the hole, I'm just going to come in here and trace approximately the hole I want to cut for both of those, and I'll cut those centers out. I like starting with a piece that I have everything ready to go, and all I have to do is embellish it. So I'll see if that worked. That's great. And I'll do the same thing here. So there I have a little shadow with my donut. The next stage is to tack the top to the donut itself. So I'll just take this here like this, and I only want the top piece. I don't want the bottom piece. I'm going to use the bottom piece when I attach it to my page. So then I'll just take whatever color thread I want to use and make small little stitches just around the edge here. I'm just using a running stitch. Use whatever stitch you want to really embellish that donut, make it stand out and be adorable. With some of the prints on the fabric, you might choose just to stitch on certain areas of the fabric, like if I wanted to just stitch the face down. I like to stitch the edge myself, but it's totally up to you. And that's where the variations come into play with this slow stitching. And no 2 objects really look alike. It's kind of neat that way. Everything has a personal touch created by the author of the piece. Even if you're inspired by someone's design or someone's idea, ultimately it becomes all your own. So I'll stitch all the way around, and once I'm happy with the way it's stitched, I can move on to the next stage. So I like to attach the top piece to all 4 of my donuts, however I want to make them look interesting and unusual. Once my top pieces are done, then the next stage is attaching it to our backing piece and stuffing it. So I'm going to attach this piece, and then we'll come back and work on our donuts with the holes. So now to create the donut with the hole, it's a similar thing. You just have to keep in mind you have that hole. So one thing to do is you can take your fabric and cut out another circle. I can use my template again. And so I know that this is roughly the size of the donut when it's cut out. But because I want it to just look like a ring of glaze, I'll just create a little ring inside here. Just some rounded edges. And then the same thing on the inside so that I have that hole exposed in the center of the donut. And I like to cut. This time, I start with my hole and cut around. And then I just verify that it will work and it fits nicely. And now I can just come around here and cut the edge. Takes a little bit of patience to get this edge. Just go slowly. And then I have a little edge here. I would just take my pink thread and straight stitch it all the way around the edge, just like I did with these two. Or there's another option you can take with your donut. There's actually a few. You could stitch little stitches to make it appear as if there's sprinkles on your donut. Or you could stitch stripes so it looks like there was a glaze that was dipped over the donut. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to take the donut, and this time I'm just going to take the backing, just because I want that to really have a little more body. And I'll start at one end here, and I'll just do a series of running stitches in straight lines on the donut. And this is a play on the glaze, and it's also a play on the fabric because it's a stitch. So once I have one bunch of running stitches down, I'll come back in that area that's empty and just fill in the stitches there. So I'm kind of implying that it's the glaze, but I'm using my stitches to do it. You can use any color. I'm just using white for the contrast. And then I'll come over here and start another line of stitches and do the same thing, where I have my running stitch, and I'm pushing the fabric on the point of that needle so I can get a bunch of stitches in at once. And I draw the stitches through. I'll make my last stitch here. And then because I want to fill in those stitches, I'll just go back in and fill it in. Takes a little more time, but I like that look. It's almost like a fake back stitch. It's a little quicker than the back stitch. I want to make sure my stitches aren't pulled too tight so that it's pulling the fabric. And I'll do this the length of the donut, and we'll take a look at it. So there we have 4 donuts. Here's a variation of the solid donut with little stitches to make it look like frosting. So that's another option that I have that I could use with the donuts. The next stage is to tack the donuts to our piece. This is where we create the composition of our work and we start stuffing the donuts if that's something you'd like to do. And I'll show you how I do that. So I have my thread on my needle. This is just some dark beige pearl thread. And I like the way that looks, that color, that little contrast. What I'll do is I'll take the 4 donuts that I want and I'll put them in position where I want them, just to see how they look. So this is how I want them to look. I'll take a pin to hold them in position, and I'll tack them down, and I'll tack all of them down to the backing. So now once again, I'm going to start doing my straight stitch all the way around. What I like to do is have a little edge sticking up from the donut, so I just stitch not through the shadow piece, but through this beige piece of the donut. And I'll just come up and make a series of small little stitches very close to the edge of that fabric. And again, the whole point of this is to tack that donut down. So I just make a series of little stitches, and I don't want to go all the way around the piece completely, just 3/4 of the way. So I make all my stitches approximately the same size, try and space them equally, and try and keep the piece flat while I'm doing it. I like to rotate the fabric all the way around, so I'm not always looking at it in the same formation. And I just want to make sure all my stitches go through all those layers, the batting, the backing piece, as well as all the layers of the donut. Now I'm about halfway through. I'm going to keep going because I want to get about 3/4 of the way through the donut, maybe even a little further. Again, I just take all my stitches. This is the part that I like to do. It's calming. It's just a very simple stitch, and this is where your piece starts to come alive. So this is the part I don't like to rush. On camera, I tend to rush it. So when I have 3/4 or maybe even a little further along of that donut stitched to the piece, I'll remove that pin. And now you can decide. Right now it just looks like something abstract, but I want to give it a little dimension as if it was a real donut. So I'm going to take a little bit of this fluff and just tuck it under all the pieces inside this piece, this donut here. Then I can use my little stick just to move it around. My goal is not to have it so raised that it's an obstruction, but just enough to have a little dimension. And I like it to be a little higher at the center point, just like on a real donut. So once I have that, I make sure that my fabric pieces are in the correct position, and then I'll just come back in and finish stitching this down. So I'll knot that off on the back, and then I'll go around stitching all my pieces down. Now the way that I stitch and fill the donuts with the donut holes is just slightly different. I'll stitch all the way around that center area first, and I'll show you that. So the way I stitch this is just slightly different, is I want to stitch all the way around that center hole first. So I'll just start that same stitch, and this is just to anchor it in place. So I'll go all the way around the edge. And it's okay if it's a little off from the main donut, if I don't see that shadow in all the areas. So I've stitched all the way around the edge here, and now I'm going to start stitching around the perimeter of the donut. But once I go about halfway, I'm going to start stuffing it just gradually. It gets hard to really manipulate that stuffing because there's really not a lot of area. So I'm just going to continue with this straight stitch around the edge of the donut. And once I get to about the halfway point, that's when I'll pull out the fluff. So the donut is coming along, it's tacked into place. I'm about halfway around. And so now I just want to take a little bit of fluff, remove that pin, and begin to work it under that donut. You don't have to go halfway around if you want to just start at a quarter way, but I find that's a good starting point. And then I'll go around a quarter of the way and continue to stuff it again. I'll show you that as well. So I have about 3/4 of the donut now completed. Again, I'll take that stuffing and work it in there. I just want it to meet up with where we've already put the stuffing. And again, I don't need too much. So it's just a matter of playing around with it. I'll add a little more. Going on both sides. And if I have too much filling, I can just remove it. So just fill to whatever level that you're comfortable. And then I'll just come up here and finish stitching around, holding it all in place. Just a few final stitches. And I can go back if I missed any stitches or I want to make any corrections. And I can remove any of the fluff that's sticking out. So I have my last stitch. I'll just come over here, cut off any of that extra fluff. And now I'm going to continue and finish up these donuts, and we'll take a look at our piece. So whether you stitch them all on a page to have like a box of donuts, or you just make the little charms where you put one donut on a little piece of fabric, and then you can use this in your fabric journals and tuck it into your work as well. I mean, who doesn't like donuts, right? So that's how I created the fabric donuts. I also have a shorts video and a very short little clip of creating a fabric charm using the same process, so I hope you'll take a look at that as well. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for joining me today.